The space station called Nexus Prime was huge. It floated in the darkness between three different star systems like a giant metal city. Thousands of ships came and went every day, bringing traders, merchants, explorers, and travelers from hundreds of different worlds. The station had markets, shops, restaurants, repair bays, and living quarters that could house almost any kind of alien life. In the main trading hall, the air buzzed with activity. Tall, blue-skinned Altarians haggled over rare crystals, while short, furry Veclans sold exotic spices that made the air smell like flowers and lightning. Six-armed Hectons moved heavy cargo with their mechanical suits, and the snake-like sect traders whispered deals in their hissing language among all. These strange and wonderful beings sat one human woman at a small table in the corner of the food court. Her name was Hana, and she looked very ordinary compared to everyone else around her. She was not very tall, maybe 1.5 meters at most. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the gray jumpsuit that all cargo haulers used. Her face was young, but her dark eyes looked tired, like someone who had seen too much of the galaxy already. Hana ate her meal slowly. It was just basic protein paste and vitamin supplements, the kind of cheap food that spaceship crews lived on when they were far from home. She did not complain, though. Food was food, and she had been hungry before many times in her life. She kept her head down and minded her own business the way smart people did on stations like this one. At the other end of the food court, something very different was happening. A group of 7 massive aliens had pushed 3 tables together to make room for themselves. They were called Krath, and they were some of the most feared creatures in this part of the galaxy. The leader of the group was named Vex, and he was enormous. Even sitting down, he was taller than most other aliens. Standing up, Vex had thick metallic scales that covered his entire body like natural armor. His muscles bulged under the scales, and his arms were as thick as tree trunks. His head was large and angular, with a jaw full of sharp teeth that could bite through steel. His hands ended in claws that were longer than human fingers, and his eyes glowed with a red light that made other beings look away quickly. The other 6 Krath warriors were almost as big as their leader. They laughed loudly and spoke in voices that sounded like grinding metal. Their species came from a world where they had always been the top predators. Nothing on their planet could challenge them, and they had brought that same attitude with them when they left their homeworld and went into space. The Krath were not just visiting the station. They were here on business, but not the kind of business that involved buying and selling goods. Instead, they made their money by offering protection to merchant ships and trade convoys. The protection was not optional. Those ship captains who refused to pay the Krath found their vessels attacked by pirates who worked for Vex and his pack. Right now, the Krath were celebrating their latest success. A merchant convoy had tried to refuse their protection offer, so the Krath had attacked them, destroyed 2 cargo ships, and taken everything valuable. The convoy captain had begged for mercy and agreed to pay double the original price. Vex found this very amusing, as the Krath laughed and drank their victory, became louder and more aggressive. They started looking around the food court for entertainment. Other aliens began to feel nervous, and some quietly finished their meals and left. The station security guards stayed away because everyone knew the Krath were too dangerous to confront without a small army. That was when Vex noticed the human woman sitting alone at her table. His glowing red eyes focused on Hana, and a cruel smile spread across his massive face. He had never seen a human before, but he had heard stories about them. They were supposed to be one of the weakest species in the galaxy, with no natural weapons or armor. Vex stood up slowly. His full height was almost 3 meters, and his shadow fell across half the food court. Other conversations stopped as beings noticed the giant predator moving. The Krath leader walked toward Hana with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a fight. His pack followed behind him, their claws clicking on the metal floor. Hana looked up from her meal as the shadow fell across her table. She saw Vex approaching, and her body tensed slightly, but her face remained calm. She had dealt with bullies before, both human and alien ones. The key was to not show fear, because fear only made them worse. When Vex reached her table, he leaned down and put his massive clawed hands on the surface. The metal creaked under his weight. His face was now only a meter away from hers, and she could smell his breath, which was like hot metal and decay. "Look At this pathetic little creature, Vex said loudly, making sure everyone in the food court could hear him. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. Humans think they can travel the stars, but they are nothing but soft, weak prey animals. His pack laughed behind him, and the sound was like machinery breaking. Other aliens in the food court shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some began to leave quietly, not wanting to witness what might happen next. The few security guards present suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. Hana continued eating her meal and did not respond. This seemed to amuse Vex even more. He had expected the human to cower or beg, or at least show some sign of fear. Instead, she acted like he was not even there. This was not the reaction he was used to getting. The little prey thinks it can ignore a Krath warrior. Lex continued, his voice getting louder. Maybe we should teach it some manners. Show it how weak things should behave when real predators are present. The other Krath moved closer, forming a loose circle around Hana's table. Their size and presence made the space feel much smaller. More aliens left the food court, until only a few brave or foolish ones remained to watch what would happen. Hana finally looked up at Vex. Her dark eyes met his glowing red ones without flinching. This surprised him because most creatures could not maintain eye contact with a Krath for more than a few seconds. The human female was either very brave or very stupid. "I'm just trying to eat my meal," she said quietly. Her voice was calm and steady without any trace of fear. "I do not want any trouble with you or your pack trouble." Vex laughed and the sound boomed through the food court. "Little human, you are the trouble. Your entire species is an insult to the natural order of things. You have no claws, no fangs, no thick skin to protect you. You are so weak that your own planet tried to kill you with its weather and wild animals. Yet somehow you survived long enough to build spaceships and leave your world." He leaned closer until his massive head was right above hers. "You crawled into space like insects escaping from a rock. But space belongs to the strong, not to pathetic creatures like you." Hana set down her eating utensil carefully and wiped her mouth with a cloth napkin. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Even at her full height, she barely reached the middle of Vex's chest. The size difference was so extreme that it would have been comical if not for the obvious danger. Several of the remaining aliens actually chuckled at the sight. The tiny human woman looked like a child standing next to the massive Krath warrior. It seemed impossible that she could pose any threat to him or his pack, but Hana did not seem intimidated. She looked around at the circle of predators surrounding her. Each one was easily 3 times her weight, and armed with natural weapons that could tear through metal. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation like hunters who had cornered easy prey. "Tell you what, little prey animal," Vex said, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "I will give you a chance to prove that your species is not completely worthless. Face me and my pack in combat. If you can survive for just 5 minutes, I will let you crawl away with your life. You can even keep all your limbs attached." The offer was clearly meant as a joke. The idea that a single unarmed human could last 5 minutes against 7 Krath warriors was absurd. It would be like a mouse challenging a pack of wolves. "And if I refuse," Hana asked, "then we will tear you apart right here in front of everyone." Vex replied, his grin showing all his sharp teeth. "Everyone will see what happens to weak creatures who do not know their place in the galaxy. The lesson will be remembered for a long time." The food court fell completely silent. Every being present understood they were witnessing something significant. The Krath were not known for offering choices to their victims. Usually they just took what they wanted and killed anyone who got in their way. Hana looked around at the faces watching her. Some showed pity, others showed curiosity. A few seemed excited to see violence. Most just wanted to be anywhere else but were too afraid to move. The aliens knew that if they tried to leave now, the Krath might decide to make examples of them too. 5 minutes? She asked. 5 minutes. Vex confirmed, his massive jaw splitting into what might have been a grin. That is more than enough time to show everyone in this sector why humans do not belong among civilized species. The Krath pack began to spread out, preparing for what they expected would be a very short and very one-sided fight. They moved with the confidence of apex predators who had never known defeat. Their claws extended and their muscles tensed as they prepared to teach the galaxy a lesson about the natural order. But as they moved into position, something unexpected happened. The small human woman began to smile. Hana's smile was not what anyone expected. It was not the desperate grin of someone trying to hide their fear. It was not the fake smile that people used when they were trying to talk their way out of trouble. Instead, it was calm and confident, like someone who knew something that nobody else did. The smile made Vex pause for just a moment. He had seen many different reactions from his victims over the years. He had seen terror and anger and pleading and even rage, but he had never seen someone smile at him like they were looking forward to what came next. It was unsettling in a way he did not understand. "What are you smiling about, prey animal?" Vex growled, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. The human was supposed to be begging for mercy by now. "Not looking like she was enjoying herself, I was just thinking." Hana replied, her voice still calm and steady. "You and your pack seem very sure that you know how this is going to end." "Of course we know how this ends." Vex snarled, his temper flaring. "You are one small weak human and we are 7. Krath warriors. We are apex predators from a world where nothing could challenge us. You are prey from a world so dangerous that it almost killed your entire species before you learned to hide in caves." Hana nodded thoughtfully as if she was considering his words. "That is true," she said. "My homeworld was very dangerous, much more dangerous than yours, in fact." The Krath pack laughed at this ridiculous claim. Their homeworld was famous throughout the galaxy for being one of the most hostile planets ever discovered. The surface was covered with acid seas and metal-eating bacteria. The gravity was 3 times what most species could survive, and the native predators were so fierce that they hunted in packs just to have a chance against each other. "Your world was more dangerous than ours," Vex repeated mockingly. "What did you have, angry rabbits?" "Sharp rocks." Hana shook her head. "No. We had something much worse than giant predators. We had each other." This answer confused the Krath. They looked at each other uncertainly. What did that mean? Humans were obviously weak creatures. How could they be dangerous to themselves? "Let me explain." Hana continued, her smile growing a little wider. "My people have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We learned to make weapons out of anything we could find. We learned to fight in groups and as individuals. We learned to be sneaky and clever because we were always smaller and weaker than our enemies. We learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your opponent think they have already won." She gestured around the food court at the watching aliens. "Do you know what humans call creatures like you?" Big, slow, and predictable Vex's roar of anger shook the entire food court. Several aliens ducked under tables and others ran for the exits. How dare this tiny creature insult him? He was Vex, the terror of the Outer Rim. His pack had conquered dozens of worlds and made entire star systems pay tribute. "Enough talking," Vex bellowed. "You want to die so badly, I will grant your wish right here, right now." But as he stepped forward to crush the insolent human, several things happened at once. First, the lights in the food court suddenly dimmed as if someone had activated an emergency power mode. Second, the artificial gravity fluctuated slightly, making everyone feel momentarily lighter. Third, a series of mechanical sounds echoed through the station as blast doors began closing in various sections. "What is happening?" one of the Krath warriors asked nervously. "Station maintenance." Hana replied casually, though her eyes were now scanning the room with the practiced gaze of someone who noticed everything. "The automated systems run diagnostics every few hours. Nothing to worry about." But Vex was not easily distracted. He had not survived this long by being foolish. The human was up to something, but he could not figure out what a single unarmed female could not possibly have sabotaged a space station. And even if she had, what good would it do her against 7 trained warriors? "You are stalling for time," Vex accused, "but it will not help you. There is nowhere to run on this station and no one who will help you." Hana tilted her head slightly as if considering his words. "You are right," she agreed. "There is nowhere to run, and I do not expect anyone to help me. But then again, I never asked for help, did I?" The way she said this made Vex feel uneasy again. There was something in her tone that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. The human was either completely insane or she had a plan, and somehow Vex doubted she was insane. The other aliens in the food court were pressed against the walls, trying to stay as far away from the coming violence as possible. They whispered among themselves in their various languages, wondering if they should try to escape, or if moving would draw the Krath attention to them. One of the watchers was an old Trellin merchant named Kip who had been trading in this sector for over 50 years. He had seen many fights and many different species in action. Something about the human woman reminded him of stories he had heard long ago. Stories about a species that had clawed their way up from the bottom of the food chain. Through pure stubborn refusal to give up, Kip leaned over to a young Altarian trader beside him. "That human," he whispered. "She is not what she appears to be." "What do you mean?" the Altarian asked. "I have heard stories about humans," Kip replied. "They are not like other species. Most creatures either evolve to be predators or prey. Humans evolve to be survivors, and survivors are the most dangerous creatures of all." Meanwhile, Hana was slowly walking toward the center of the food court where the tables had been hastily moved aside to create an open space. The Krath pack followed her, their confidence returning as they prepared for what they expected would be a very short fight before. "We begin," Hana said, turning to face the 7 massive warriors. "I should probably tell you something about myself." "What is that little prey?" Vex asked, flexing his claws. "I am not just any human," she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent food court. "I am Korean. My people come from a peninsula on Earth that has been invaded, conquered, and attacked by enemies for thousands of years. We learned that when you are surrounded by larger, stronger opponents, you do not try to match their strength. You find their weaknesses and you exploit them." The Krath looked confused. They had never heard of Korea or Earth geography, and they did not understand why it mattered, where on the human homeworld this female came from. All humans were weak. That was simply a fact of nature. Hana continued speaking as she moved into the center of the improvised arena. "My ancestors survived by being smart, by working together, and by never giving up no matter how hopeless things looked. They taught their children that honor is important, but survival is more important. They taught us that there is no such thing as a fair fight when your life is on the line." She stopped walking and turned to face Vex directly. Even though he towered over her, she did not crane her neck to look up at him. Instead, she kept her gaze level as if they were the same height. "Most importantly," Hana said, "they taught us that the biggest predator is not always the most dangerous one. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that does not look dangerous at all." As she spoke these words, something changed in the atmosphere of the food court. The watching aliens could feel it, even if they could not name it. The small human woman was no longer just a victim waiting to be killed. She had become something else entirely. Something that made even apex predators feel uncertain. Vex tried to shake off the strange feeling that was creeping over him. This was ridiculous. He was letting a tiny prey animal get into his head with words. The human was just trying to psyche him out before the fight. It was a pathetic last-ditch attempt to avoid her fate. "Fine." Vex snarled enough talking time to show everyone what happens to creatures that do not know their place. But as he prepared to signal his pack to attack, Hana did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a communicator. She pressed a button on it and spoke clearly. Computer began recording. Combat log entry 1, Hana versus 7 Krath warriors. Duration requested 5 minutes, current time mark 0. The device beeped softly and a small light began flashing. Hana clipped it to her belt where everyone could see it. "What is that for, Vex?" "Demanded evidence," she replied simply. "In case anyone ever questions what happened here today." The Krath pack exchanged glances. This human was definitely not normal. Most prey animals spent their last moments begging or crying. This one was acting like she was about to give a performance and wanted to make sure it was properly documented. "Are you ready?" Hana asked politely, as if she was asking about the weather, instead of preparing for a fight. To the Death Vex response was a roar of pure rage that echoed through the food court like thunder. Vex's roar was the signal his pack had been waiting for. The 7 Krath warriors moved forward like a wave of living metal and fury. Their claws extended fully, and their massive bodies blocked out most of the light in the food court. The sound of their footsteps on the metal floor was like thunder rolling across the station. The watching aliens pressed themselves even further back against the walls. Some covered their eyes, not wanting to see what was about to happen to the small human woman. A few of the braver ones kept watching, but their faces showed they expected to witness a massacre. Hana stood perfectly still in the center of the improvised arena. She did not try to run, or dodge, or even raise her hands to defend herself. Instead, she watched the approaching Krath with the same calm expression she had worn throughout their entire conversation. Her dark eyes tracked each warrior, noting their positions, their speed, and the way they moved. The first Krath to reach her was a warrior, named Bex, who served as Vex's second in command. He was slightly smaller than his leader, but still massive by any reasonable standard. His metallic scales gleamed as he raised his right arm high above his head, preparing to bring his claws down on the human with enough force to split her in half. Bex was grinning as he attacked. He had done this many times before. The moment when prey realized they were about to die was always his favorite part. He expected to see terror in the human eyes, or perhaps desperate last-second pleading. Instead, he saw something that confused him. Hana was still smiling. At the very last possible second, when Beck's claws were only centimeters from her head, Hana moved. She did not try to block the attack, or catch his arm instead. She stepped to the side in a movement so fluid and precise that it looked like she had known exactly where the attack was coming from. Beck's massive clawed hand swept through empty air. The force of his missed attack threw him off balance, and he stumbled forward, unable to stop his momentum. Hana reached out with both hands and grabbed his extended arm. She used his own forward motion against him, pivoting on her heel and redirecting his charge. The result was spectacular. Beck's massive body flew through the air and crashed into 2 of his packmates who were coming up behind him. All 3 Krath warriors went down in a tangle of limbs and claws and confused roars. The sound of their collision echoed through the food court, like a small explosion. The watching aliens gasped in amazement. No one had expected the human to survive even the first attack, let alone turn it against her attacker. Several beings who had been preparing to leave stopped in their tracks suddenly. Much more interested in what was happening, Vex stared at the pile of his warriors with his mouth hanging open. This was not how the fight was supposed to go. His pack were experienced fighters who had conquered dozens of worlds. They did not get taken down by tiny prey animals using their own attacks against them. Lucky move. Vex snarled, but there was less confidence in his voice than before. Hana shrugged, as if throwing around creatures 3 times her size was something she did every day. Luck had nothing to do with it, she replied. Your friend telegraphed his attack from the moment he started moving. While they were talking, the 3 fallen Krath were getting back to their feet. They looked embarrassed and angry, which made them even more dangerous than before. Bex in particular seemed furious that he had been made to look foolish in front of his pack leader. The remaining 4 warriors who had not been caught in the collision spread out in a wider circle around Hana. They were being more careful now, treating her like an actual threat instead of helpless prey. Their movements were more coordinated, and their attacks would be harder to redirect. Vex nodded to his pack, and they all moved forward at once. This time there would be no single attacks that could be turned against them. They would overwhelm the human with numbers and coordinated strikes. She might have gotten lucky once, but she could not possibly handle all of them at the same time. Hana watched them approach, and her smile grew a little wider. She began moving in a slow circle, keeping all the Krath in sight. Her movements were relaxed and fluid, like someone warming up for exercise rather than fighting for their life. The first coordinated attack came from 3 directions at once. 2 warriors approached from her left and right, while a third came straight at her from the front. It was a classic pincer movement designed to leave the target with no escape route. But Hana did not try to escape. Instead, she did something none of the Krath expected. She moved toward the attack coming from her front. The warrior coming straight at her was named Nex, and he was known for his speed despite his massive size. He had both arms extended with his claws spread, wide, intending to grab the human and hold her still. While his packmates finished her off, Hana dropped into a crouch at the last second, sliding under necks, reaching arms like she was stealing a base in an ancient earth sport. As she slid past him, she struck upward with the heel of her palm. The blow connected with a nerve cluster just below his ribcage. Neck stumbled, and his coordination failed for a crucial moment. The two warriors coming from the sides could not stop their own attacks in time, and instead of hitting the human, they collided with their own packmate. All three Krath went down in another spectacular crash. The watching crowd was no longer silent. Aliens from dozens of different species were cheering and shouting in amazement. Many of them had suffered under Krath aggression over the years, and seeing someone finally stand up to the so-called apex predators was incredibly satisfying. 2 minutes into the fight, and 4 of the 7 Krath warriors were on the ground. 3 who were still standing looked at each other with growing uncertainty. This was not going according to plan at all. "How are you doing this?" Vex demanded, his earlier confidence completely gone. "You are just a human. You should not be able to fight." Krath warriors. Hana paused in her circling movement and tilted her head as if considering the question. "That is your problem right there," she said. "You keep thinking about what I should be able to do, instead of paying attention to what I am actually doing." She gestured at his fallen packmates who were slowly getting back to their feet. "Your people became apex predators on your homeworld because you were bigger and stronger than everything else. You never had to learn to fight smart because you never had to. You just used brute force for everything." The remaining 3 Krath warriors were now back on their feet, but they looked much less confident than before. They had bruises and cuts from their falls, and their earlier certainty had been replaced by wariness. "But humans." Hana continued, her voice carrying clearly through the now crowded food court. "We had to fight creatures bigger and stronger than us from the very beginning. We could not rely on size or natural weapons. We had to use our brains. We had to study our enemies and find their weaknesses. We had to turn their strengths against them." She pointed at Bex, who was nursing a sore shoulder from his collision with his packmates. "Your friend there is very strong and very fast, but he puts all his weight behind his attacks. When he misses, he cannot recover quickly. A smaller fighter can use that against him." Vex was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The human was not just lucky. She was trained. She knew things about combat that his pack had never learned because they had never needed to learn them. The Krath had always been able to win fights through intimidation and overwhelming force. They had never faced an opponent who could turn their own strength against them. They were like giant hammers trying to hit a target that moved like water. As this realization sank in, Vex felt something he had not experienced in many years. Fear. Not the simple caution that came from facing a dangerous opponent, but real, genuine fear of losing a fight. Around the food court, more aliens were gathering to watch. Word was spreading through the station that something incredible was happening. The mighty Krath pack was being challenged by a single human woman, and she was winning. Among the watchers was an old sect trader who had dealt with humans before. He turned to the alien next to him and hissed softly in his native language. "Never underestimate a human," he said in broken standard, "especially one who smiles before a fight." The timer on Hana recording device showed that 3 minutes had passed. She was still moving smoothly, showing no signs of fatigue, while several of the Krath warriors were breathing heavily. The pack that had entered this fight expecting an easy victory was beginning to realize they were in serious trouble. "Time for round 2, Hana said pleasantly, as the 7 Krath warriors regrouped for another attack. The 7 Krath warriors stood in a ragged circle around Hana, trying to figure out how their easy victory had turned into a nightmare. Their scales were scratched, their pride was wounded, and worst of all, they were starting to doubt themselves. For creatures who had built their entire identity around being unstoppable predators, this was a devastating blow. Vex looked at his pack and saw confusion in their glowing red eyes. They kept glancing at each other as if hoping someone else would have an answer to their problem. But there was no answer. The small human woman had done something impossible. She had made them look weak in front of a crowd of witnesses. The food court was now packed with aliens who had come to watch the spectacle. Word had spread through the station like wildfire that the notorious Krath pack was being challenged by a single human. Many of the watchers were species that had been bullied or threatened by the Krath in the past. They pressed forward eagerly, hoping to see their tormentors finally get what they deserved. Among the crowd was a group of Hecton workers who had been forced to pay protection money to the Krath for months. There was also a delegation of Altarian merchants whose cargo ships had been attacked when they refused to surrender their valuable crystals. Even some of the station security guards had quietly joined the crowd, though they stayed in the back where they would not be easily noticed. The timer on Hana recording device showed 3 minutes and 15 seconds. She had survived longer than anyone thought possible, and she was showing no signs of slowing down. If anything, she seemed to be getting more confident as the fight continued. "This is impossible," Vex growled as he wiped metallic blood from a cut on his arm. "She is just one small human. How can she be doing this to us?" Hana heard him and smiled, that same calm, confident smile that had been unsettling the Krath since the fight began. "The answer is simple," she said as she continued to move in her slow circle. "You have been apex predators for so long that you forgot there might be something higher up the food chain." "What could be higher than apex predators?" Next demanded evolution. Hana replied, "The thing about being at the top of the food chain is that you stop evolving. You stop adapting because you do not need to. But humans never reached the top. We were always somewhere in the middle fighting to survive. That kept us sharp. It kept us learning." She gestured at the crowd of watching aliens. "Look around you. How many different species are here watching this fight? They are not here because they love violence. They are here because they want to see if it is possible for someone to stand up to bullies." The Krath pack looked around and for the first time really noticed the crowd. The sheer number of beings watching was intimidating, but more than that was the expression on their faces. There was hope there. Hope that the mighty Krath could be beaten. Hope that the galaxy might be a little bit safer after today. Vex realized that this fight had become about much more than just one human woman defying his pack. It had become a symbol. The outcome would be talked about for years and would affect his reputation across dozens of star systems. If he lost here, his pack would never be feared the same way again. "Enough talking," Vex roared. "We end this now. All of you attack at once. No coordination, no fancy moves. Just overwhelm her with pure force." The pack responded to their leader order by spreading out as wide as possible around Hana. They would attack from every direction at the same time, making it impossible for her to dodge or redirect all of them. Even if she could handle one or two attackers, 7 simultaneous strikes would surely finish her. But as they prepared for their final assault, something unexpected happened. The lights in the food court flickered and dimmed. The artificial gravity fluctuated again, causing everyone to feel momentarily weightless, and from somewhere deep in the station came the sound of heavy blast doors sealing shut. "What is happening?" Vex demanded, looking around suspiciously. "Station security protocol," Hana answered calmly. "When the automated systems detect a large-scale disturbance, they lock down sections of the station to prevent damage from spreading." But that was not entirely true. Hana had been doing much more than just eating her meal when she sat at that corner table. She had been using a small portable computer to access the station maintenance systems. The flickering lights and gravity fluctuations were not random. They were carefully timed distractions. The Krath, however, did not know this. They assumed the station systems were reacting to their presence, which made them feel even more powerful and confident. The technical difficulties would not help the human when 7 sets of claws were tearing her apart. As the lights stabilized, the pack launched their coordinated attack. All 7 warriors moved forward at once, their massive bodies converging on the small human woman from every possible angle. It looked like an avalanche of metal and muscle that nothing could survive. But Hana had been waiting for exactly this moment. When opponents attacked in a large group, they often got in each other's way and created openings that would not exist in smaller fights. She had been studying the Krath movement patterns throughout the entire battle, and now she knew exactly what each warrior would do. As the first attacker reached her, Hana dropped to the ground and rolled between his legs. The warrior's massive clawed hand swept through empty air where her head had been a split second before. As she rolled, she struck upward, hitting a pressure point behind his knee that caused his leg to buckle. The falling Krath crashed into two of his packmates who were coming from the opposite direction. Their collision was so violent that it shook the floor of the food court. All three warriors went down in a heap of tangled limbs and confused roars, but Hana was not finished. As she came out of her roll, she was moving toward the remaining four attackers instead of away from them. This caught them completely off guard. They had expected her to try to escape, not to charge into their midst. The youngest member of the pack was a warrior named Gex, who was eager to prove himself to his elders. He swung both arms in a wide arc, trying to catch the human between his claws. It was a powerful attack that would have crushed most opponents, but it was also slow and predictable. Hana ducked under his swing and stepped inside his guard where his long arms could not reach her. Her elbow found the nerve cluster at the base of his neck with surgical precision. The massive warrior dropped to the ground like his strings had been cut. He was not dead, but he was completely paralyzed and would not be getting up anytime soon. The crowd erupted in cheers as another Krath went down. Several aliens were jumping up and down in excitement while others were recording the fight on their personal devices. This was history in the making, and they wanted proof that they had witnessed it. Impossible, Vex breathed as he stared at his fallen packmate Krath. Physiology is completely different from human anatomy. You should not know where our nerve centers are located. But I do know, Hana replied as she faced the remaining three warriors. I studied your species extensively. Before coming to this sector, knowledge is power and power is survival. This revelation hit Vex like a physical blow. The human had not just stumbled into this confrontation. She had planned for it. She had prepared for it. She had made herself into a weapon specifically designed to fight Krath warriors. How long? Vex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this? Long enough, Hana answered. The timer on her recording device now showed 4 minutes and 10 seconds. The three remaining Krath looked at each other with growing desperation. Their pack had been reduced to less than half its original strength by a single opponent who barely reached their waists. The crowd was cheering for their enemy, and their reputation was being destroyed with every passing second. But they were still dangerous cornered predators, and cornered predators were often at their most lethal. Vex's eyes blazed with fury as he prepared for one final, desperate attack. This ends now, he roared, abandoning all strategy and charging straight at Hana with killing intent. The human woman stood perfectly still and waited for him to come. Vex charged across the food court like a runaway freight train. His massive form blocked out the light as he bore down on the small human woman. His claws were fully extended and his jaw was open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that could bite through solid metal. The sound of his footsteps was like thunder rolling across the station. The watching crowd held their breath. Many aliens covered their eyes, not wanting to see the tiny human, crushed by 3 meters of furious apex predator. Even those who had been cheering for Hana felt a moment of doubt. How could anyone survive a direct assault from something so large and powerful and angry? But Hana did not move. She stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, watching Vex approach, with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the entire fight. Her dark eyes tracked his movement, calculating distance and timing with the precision of a computer. The timer on her recording device showed 4 minutes and 28 seconds. She had less than 30 seconds left to prove her point, and she intended to make every one of them count. When Vex was only 3 meters away from crushing her, Hana finally moved. But instead of dodging to the side or trying to run away, she did something that made the entire crowd gasp in amazement. She stepped forward toward the charging Krath leader. At the exact moment when Vex's massive clawed hands reached for her, Hana dropped to one knee and struck upward with the heel of her palm. The blow was aimed at a specific point just below his ribcage, where his natural armor was thinnest. Her strike connected with surgical precision, hitting the nerve cluster that controlled his diaphragm. The effect was immediate and devastating. Vex doubled over in pain as his breathing stopped. His charge turned into a stumbling fall as his body betrayed him. He crashed to the floor, gasping for air that would not come. His massive frame shook as he tried to understand what had happened to him before he could recover. Hana was behind him, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. She wrapped her arm around his thick neck, positioning herself so that she could apply pressure to the specific points that would cut off blood flow to his brain. It was a move that required perfect knowledge of Krath anatomy and perfect timing. Any mistake would have meant death. But Hana had studied her enemy well. She knew exactly where to press and how much force to apply. Vex tried to throw her off, but the nerve strike to his diaphragm had weakened him. He could not get enough air to fuel his massive muscles. His claws scraped uselessly at the floor as he struggled against the chokehold. The great apex predator, who had terrorized entire star systems, was being systematically shut down by someone a third his size. The remaining two Krath warriors stared in shock as their leader fell to his knees. They wanted to help him, but they were afraid to get too close. The small human had already taken down 5 of their packmates, and she showed no signs of slowing down. 4 minutes and 45 seconds the timer showed, 15 seconds left. Hana maintained her hold on Vex's neck as his struggles grew weaker. His vision was starting to blur as the blood flow to his brain decreased. The great warrior who had never known defeat was experiencing something completely foreign to him. He was losing, and there was nothing he could do about it. The crowd was completely silent now. Every alien in the food court was watching history being made. The mighty Krath pack that had ruled through fear and intimidation was being brought down by a single human woman who had turned their own strength against them. "Sleep now," Hana whispered in Vex's ear. Her voice was gentle, almost kind, like a mother putting a child to bed. "There is no shame in losing to someone who was better prepared." With those words, Vex's consciousness faded away. His massive body went limp, and he collapsed to the floor. The apex predator, who had thought himself invincible, lay unconscious at the feet of his tiny opponent. The timer reached 5 minutes exactly, and stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence in the food court. Then the crowd erupted, in the loudest cheer that Nexus Prime had ever heard. Aliens from dozens of different species were jumping and shouting and celebrating. Some were crying tears of joy, while others were recording everything on their personal devices. Hana stood over the fallen Krath leader and calmly straightened her jumpsuit. She looked around at the remaining pack members who were staring at her with expressions of complete shock and disbelief. None of them moved to attack. They had seen enough to know that challenging her would be suicide. The small human woman walked back to her table and sat down to finish her meal as if nothing unusual had happened. The protein paste was cold by now, but she ate it anyway. Food was still food, and she had worked up an appetite. The crowd began to approach her cautiously. Many wanted to congratulate her or ask her questions, but they were not sure if it was safe to get too close. Someone who could defeat 7 Krath warriors might not appreciate being disturbed during her meal. The first to reach her was Kip, the old Trellin merchant who had recognized something special about her from the beginning. He bowed respectfully before speaking. How he asked simply, "How did you do?" What no one thought was possible. Hana looked up from her meal and smiled, that same calm, confident smile. Preparation, she said, education, and a refusal to be intimidated by bullies. "My people learned long ago that knowledge defeats strength every time." She gestured at the unconscious Krath. "The pack made the same mistake that bullies always make. They assumed that because I looked weak, I actually was weak. They never bothered to find out who I really was or what I was capable of." By now more aliens had gathered around her table. A young Altarian female asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Are you some kind of special warrior? A soldier or a fighter?" Hana shook her head. "No, I am exactly what I appear to be. A cargo hauler trying to make a living in a dangerous galaxy. But I am also Korean, and my people have a saying. When you are small, you must be smart. When you are weak, you must be clever. And when you are outnumbered, you must be better prepared than your enemies." She pointed at her small computer that was still connected to the table. "I spent 3 days studying Krath anatomy and fighting techniques before this confrontation. I learned about their nerve clusters, their movement patterns, and their psychological weaknesses. I turned this fight into a classroom, and they were the students," the crowd murmured in amazement. The human had not just gotten lucky. She had planned and prepared and turned the encounter into a strategic victory rather than a test of strength. "What happens now?" someone asked. Now, Hana replied calmly, the galaxy learned something important. Never underestimate a human, especially one who has had time to study you. She stood up and walked over to where Vex was slowly regaining consciousness. The massive Krath leader looked up at her, with confusion and something that might have been respect. You said humans do not belong among the stars. Hana said quietly. You were wrong. We belong here because we earned our place. We survived our homeworld by being smart and adaptable, and we will survive in space the same way. Vex tried to speak, but only managed a weak growl. Your pack will leave this station and never return. Hana continued. You will spread the word that humans are not prey animals. We are survivors, and survivors are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. She turned back to the crowd of watching aliens. Remember this day, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Remember that strength is not just about size or claws or teeth. Real strength comes from knowledge, preparation, and the courage to stand up for what is right. The crowd cheered again as Hana collected her belongings and headed for the exit. She had a cargo delivery to make, and she was already behind schedule. As she walked away, the aliens began talking excitedly among themselves. The story of the human woman who defeated the Krath pack would spread through the trading networks within hours. By the end of the week, it would be known across dozens of star systems. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day: never underestimate a human who smiles before a fight, because that smile means they know something you do not, and in the cold darkness of space, knowledge is the deadliest weapon of all.